Once, an elderly woman, barely waiting for the early morning to arrive, discovered a tiny creature, a frozen kitten shivering like an autumn leaf in a strong wind. Time passed, and the kitten gradually grew, but its behavior caused the old woman increasing confusion. The small front paws were flailing without visible reasons, and the smart, bright yellow eyes observed the surrounding world with keen attentiveness. When the mystery was finally revealed, the old woman experienced an incredible shock. The kitten was not at all what one might assume at first glance. A few steps from there, on one of the autumn evenings, she had to endure an event deeply etched in her memory. Then, in the silence and calm of her small living room, where only the flickering light of a burning candle penetrated, a strange sound suddenly emerged. The old woman froze in fear, clutching a cup of hot tea in her trembling hands, and began to listen to the unusual sounds of the autumn night. After a few seconds, everything repeated. A barely audible, plaintive squeak echoed through the cool air. Frightened but determined, she took a deep breath, draped a colorful scarf over her shoulders, and quietly stood up. Twilight had already enveloped her yard, giving it a dim appearance. The night chill heightened every rustle. Trees creaked, and the wind rustled dry leaves. The old woman's curiosity intertwined with anxiety. Carefully taking the lantern off the hook by the door, she slowly descended the steps. The beam of light, like a thin strip of hope, cut through the thickening darkness, creating dancing shadows on the walls and trees. She moved through her garden, trying to discern the sound, and soon heard it at the base of a mighty oak on the edge of the yard. There, in the deep shadow, she saw a tiny bundle that, pressed against the tree roots, shivered incessantly from the cold. The creature turned out to be a tiny kitten with wide-open eyes filled with fear. The old woman's heart, cold from loneliness, felt a sudden warmth. It seemed to begin to slowly melt at the sight of this helpless creature. Without hesitation, she gently picked up the kitten in her hands. Its wet fur was icy to the touch, and its defenseless body continued to shake from the cold. Feeling the warmth emanating from her, the kitten pressed closer to her, and the wind, blowing in a sudden gust, reminded her of the late season and the biting cold. The old woman did not hesitate. Picking up the kitten, she hurried to take it inside, wrapping it in a piece of warm fabric, worrying all the way about its health. The worry and fear for the little one, intertwined in her soul, gave her determination. Upon arriving in the familiar setting of the kitchen, where a calm warmth emanated from everywhere, the old woman carefully washed the kitten with warm water, removing the dirt and remnants of the night's cold. A barely audible squeak sounded again, breaking the ensuing silence. After the washing, she placed the kitten on soft fabric and warmed it with a cup of steamed milk. The little guest began to drink eagerly, as if it were his first meal in many days. A wave of warmth gradually enveloped him, and the shivering ceased, giving way to a soft glow in his eyes. The old woman couldn't suppress a slight smile, for the presence of this little one seemed to restore her sense of purpose and awaken a special joy in her soul. Thinking about how the kitten ended up in the middle of her garden, she continued to feel anxious, but watching him now peacefully sleeping in her lap, she rejoiced in his company. His unexpected appearance filled her home with a long-awaited sense of care and coziness, as if a new, tender breath had opened in her life. Soon, Marta, the elderly woman's name, began to regain her long-lost confidence. When the soft morning light timidly penetrated the room, it seemed to try to dispel the remaining darkness of the night. In a cozy bed set up in the corner of the room, the new little resident of Marta awakened quietly. The very same nameless kitten, barely awake. He immediately sensed that his owner was already awake and opened his eyes to greet the world. Marta, with kindness in her heart, watched him, experiencing a wave of warm feelings. At one moment, feeling her strength awakening, Marta realized it was time to get to know this little one better. She carefully took the kitten in her hands and went outside with him, where the new day greeted them with bright colors and a fresh breeze. The world beyond the threshold suddenly came alive, filled with a barely perceptible magic alongside their presence. Walking along the path to the old oak, Marta recalled their first meeting. Now, under the cheerful sunlight, this place no longer seemed as mysterious and frightening as that night. Bending over the ground, she saw numerous crumpled leaves and signs of struggle imprinted in the soft soil, as if a reminder that this tiny creature had fought here for its life. She imagined again how she found him barely alive at the base of the tree. Returning to the garden, Marta sat on a bench, holding the kitten close to herself, as if protecting him from all possible misfortunes. In her heart grew and strengthened an immense feeling of attachment. Almost whispering, looking into his eyes, she said, "You are a true little explorer, aren't you?" The kitten softly squeaked in response, as if sharing her thoughts. His gaze reflected both curiosity and the lingering fear. It seemed he recognized the place, remembering the challenging moments he had endured. With each passing day, Marta's understanding deepened that she was obliged to protect this little one, preventing him from facing difficult trials again. Upon returning home, she began to modify certain elements of the yard to make it safer. And while Marta was rearranging the space, the kitten playfully clumsily ran around her feet, quietly muttering as if already mastering his new home. Soon, Marta felt a surge of confidence within herself. She vowed that he would never be alone again and would no longer be subjected to risky situations. All the anxieties that once tormented her heart gradually receded, giving way to a soft feeling of inner warmth. The unexpected guest who entered her life became a symbol of a new chapter, and she eagerly awaited the challenges and joys that lay ahead. When evening came and the door closed behind them, a slight smile appeared on Marta's face. As she went to bed, she understood that her measured life would no longer be the same. The quiet patter of small paws now echoed in it. This change brought her joy, as Oliver, the name she chose for her fluffy little one, quickly adapted to his new home. On his first night in Marta's room, cautious sounds could be heard. He explored the space, while she, lying in bed, listened to his rustlings. A fine line between excitement and a feeling of deep tenderness settled in her soul. Marta suddenly wondered if Oliver needed to be examined by a specialist. Dialing the number of the local veterinary clinic, she scheduled an appointment with Dr. Brown. The kitten, as if sensing something unusual, behaved more cautiously when they arrived for the examination. The veterinarian greeted them with his usual smile and, holding out his hand, waited for Oliver to sniff it. "Who do we have here?" Dr. Brown said warmly. Marta, with a slight flutter in her heart, watched as the veterinarian carefully examined her pet. The doctor noted that Oliver's condition had significantly improved, although his young age and past trials required special care. As they left the clinic, Marta felt a sense of relief. Carefully placing the necessary medicines, vitamins, and a small supply of food in her bag, she spent the entire journey telling Oliver about different plants, birds, and corners of the garden, showing him the world of which he had now become a part. Gradually, the kitten became bolder, and his curiosity only grew. In the living room, he eagerly chased the sunbeams sliding across the floor. By evening, Marta, finally settled in her favorite armchair, suddenly realized she was laughing out loud. This sound was so rare in her home that she was even surprised by her own laughter. At the same time, Oliver, snugly settled in her lap, purred softly. It was at that moment she realized how much her gray days had changed. Loneliness had receded, and life was filled with joyful little things. Evenings, which once seemed endlessly quiet, transformed, gaining new colors that reflected their mutual need for each other. Watching Oliver as he fell asleep, Marta felt her heart fill with tenderness and responsibility. It was evident that he had not only fully settled in, but had also become a part of her soul, bringing peace and joy. Days passed, lazily flowing into weeks, and as Oliver grew, Marta noticed traits in him that set him apart from other kittens she had encountered. One morning, settled with a cup of tea by the window, she saw the cat in the dim corners of the room move with attentiveness and concentration, traits not typical of young cats. He wasn't just playing. His movements were precise, measured, reflecting a hidden vigilance. The slightest sound or movement around did not escape his sharp yellow gaze, from which emanated an inexplicable threat. As soon as a leaf fell outside the window, Oliver instantly rushed to the glass, pressing his paws against the surface like an impeccable hunter waiting for the moment to strike. During their time together, Marta learned that Oliver loyally followed her steps, attentively studying each of her moves and listening to any barely audible noise. It seemed his heightened hearing picked up what humans could not discern. This behavior elicited mixed emotions in Marta. She admired the cat's intelligence, but at the same time, anxiety began to arise. The longer she observed the little predator, the more she was convinced that his character was not limited to mere curious playfulness. Small toys, like fluffy balls or feathered sticks, were his favorite training tools on which he honed his grace and agility. Several times, watching Oliver literally hunt these toys, Marta caught herself thinking that something wild and primal was awakening within him. Sometimes, seeing how he made precise lunges or gracefully changed his body position, she wondered, are there great secrets hiding behind this innocent appearance? Step by step, Marta realized that mere attention was not enough for Oliver. There was clearly something more hidden in him than the usual playfulness of a domestic cat. As winter began to creep closer and evenings became shorter and colder, Marta's home felt especially cozy. The fireplace crackled with wood, creating a soft, muted light. But this warm atmosphere clearly contrasted her inner anxiety. Oliver's behavior, displaying increasingly strange traits each week, intensified her sense of worry. Marta recalled how, one day in the garden, she noticed his reaction to fluttering birds. Instead of the usual hunt, he seemed to freeze, evaluating them with cold patience, like a seasoned specialist in his field. Such a scene troubled her, as the cat maintained a tense stance even after the birds had long flown away. In this hidden movement, an incredible strength was evident in his compact body. One evening, deciding to check how inclined Oliver was to cat games, Marta offered him a toy infused with catnip. However, he showed no interest, merely sniffing it briefly before indifferently turning away. Instead, a modest scrap of thread that got under his paw aroused genuine curiosity and playful excitement in the cat. From such observations, Marta increasingly understood that her little resident differed radically from other kittens not only externally, but also internally. His dense silvery fur, an amazingly round face with fluffy cheeks, and those piercing yellow eyes emphasized his uniqueness, while his upright posture revealed innate strength. One evening, sitting together in front of the fireplace, Marta curiously gazed at Oliver's graceful silhouette. His ears twitched at every crackle of the wood, and his muscles remained ready for any sudden movement. By the flickering firelight, she seriously pondered for the first time whether he was as domestic as he seemed. "Oliver, who are you really?" she whispered with a sigh, slightly smiling but feeling an internal tremor. The cat turned his head and looked at her with his deeply penetrating gaze, as if capable of understanding the essence of her question. The next day, these doubts became even stronger. Neighbor Susan, dropping by to see this unusual cat, exclaimed, "Marta, this is an amazing creature. Just look at his eyes and how he behaves, as if he knows everything about us in advance." Marta hurried to dismiss her words as a joke, but inside she felt that Susan had hit the nail on the head. After the neighbor left, the feeling of unease intensified, and Marta decided to make a phone call to Dr. Brown to share her observations and doubts about her pet. The following day, she brought Oliver to the clinic. Dr. Brown, always known for his kindness, first greeted her with a warm smile, but frowned during the examination. "Marta, just look at his eyes. I've seen many cats, but this specimen is completely special," he said with notes of excitement and slight anxiety simultaneously. "I think it's worth conducting some special tests," the doctor continued, "to unravel the mysteries and understand whether Oliver indeed belongs to ordinary domestic cats." Marta agreed, feeling fear and hope battling within her. Leaving the office, she realized that Oliver might be more complicated than she initially thought. After all, he clearly possessed not only a bright personality, but also a deep, almost enigmatic secret that was gradually unfolding as they lived together. In the following days, Marta lived in tense anticipation. The phone call could come at any moment, bringing answers to her accumulated questions. And finally, the call came. Approaching the phone, she heard Dr. Brown's slightly anxious voice. "Mrs. Thompson, we have the test results ready." A chill ran down Marta's spine. Oliver, sitting on the windowsill with his head proudly raised, also seemed on guard, awaiting what people would say. The genetic tests show significant deviations from normal feline markers. Moreover, they indicate Marta felt her chest tighten with excitement. Her suspicions were beginning to materialize. The news Dr. Brown delivered shook Marta. Oliver might not just be a domestic kitten, but a creature related to rare Pallas cats or even wild members of the feline family inhabiting Central Asia. These species are distinguished by their particular grace and unique genetic traits. Understanding that she had taken in a creature with a wild nature simultaneously brought Marta both excitement and fear. The consequences could be significant, affecting wildlife protection laws. Dr. Brown explained that such cases often occur when a small wild kitten is mistaken for an ordinary domestic one. At a young age, the line is indeed hard to discern. We need to consider Oliver's future and possible restrictions related to wildlife protection, the doctor warned. Listening to these words, Marta looked at Oliver and increasingly saw that wild imprint on his face. He seemed to sense her confusion and, with his usual movement, jumped off the windowsill, gently approached his owner, wrapping around her legs and trying to soothe her anxiety. Touching his dense, silvery fur, she couldn't help but realize that within this creature lay a not yet fully awakened natural force. However, the mutual trust that had developed between them was too strong for her to dismiss her feelings. Nevertheless, she understood that her little one's fate had to be decided considering his true nature, not her personal desires. "I hope I can give him the very best," Marta whispered, feeling her voice begin to tremble with excitement. "I cannot afford to be selfish, for he deserves to live as he is destined." Several months passed before the day of farewell arrived. Holding Oliver in her arms for the last time, Marta felt his pleasant warmth and heard his soft purring, offering her comfort. She consciously decided to transfer her cat to a specialized wildlife protection center, understanding that there they would help him restore and preserve his natural instincts. "Goodbye, my Oliver," she breathed out, carefully placing him in the carrier. He looked at her with shining, dark yellow eyes, as if truly understanding that their paths were diverging. The car taking him farther away left a light trail of dust behind. Marta stood, feeling the wet tracks from tears cooling her cheeks, and didn't take her eyes off the departing car until it completely disappeared. In her soul, the bitter pain of farewell mixed with quiet relief. She knew that Oliver would gain freedom and the opportunity to live in harmony with his essence. The task she had undertaken, to connect his past and future, was accomplished. When the twilight lights faded, Marta slowly turned around and walked back. In her soul, she held gratitude for all the lessons this unusual guest had taught her. He taught her to treat nature with care, to appreciate the strength of wildlife, and to accept all twists of fate. Oliver was no longer by her side, but the memory of him remained an eternal imprint in her heart, enlivening the most treasured corners of her soul.